What are the conditions when I perform at my best? And there are many conditions that apply, but these 6 have disproportionately greater impact. And they are, in no particular order, purpose, challenge, attention, growth, recognition, and the 6th is choice.
Are all of those 6 conditions equally important for people's performance, or does one of them take priority over the others?
All of them are tremendously important.
Hi, I'm Helen Tupper, the host of HSBC's Power Up podcast, a podcast that is all about helping people to perform at their best. HSBC has spent the past few years transforming. It's got a plan and it's performing well. The opportunity now is to sustain and grow that performance, and that is what this podcast is all about. We're going to be hearing from lots of different people about what performance means to them, gaining ideas and fresh perspectives that can help us be at our best in our work. In today's podcast, we're going to be talking about how you can power up your performance, and we'll be learning from Octavius Black, the founder of MindGym, an organisation that uses behavioural science to influence people's performance and impact in their roles. We're going to be talking about the 6 different things that you can do to nail your performance at work. Octavius, welcome to the Power Up podcast.
Thank you very much, Helen. Delighted to be here.
Brilliant to have you here as our first guest on the series. I wonder if we can kick things off with what is powering you up at the moment?
What powers me up today and every day is trying to change the way the world thinks.
Amazing. And I know today we're going to be talking about one of the insights that you've had during that time, which is about the factors that contribute towards performance, which is the focus of today's episode. So there are 6 conditions, I think, that have come from your research, which are the most important influences over people's performance. I wonder if you can just give us an insight into what those 6 conditions are, and then we'll dive a bit deeper into how we can use them to inform our own career.
Absolutely. These come from an enormous amount of research, not just done by us. We did the meta-analysis of decades of research into what are the conditions when I perform at my best. And there are many conditions that apply, but these 6 have disproportionately greater impact. And they are, in no particular order, purpose, so feeling that my work matters, or at the very least it wasn't irrelevant. Challenge, feeling that I'm stretched to try and do something that plays to my strengths. I can't quite see how to get there, but I'm sure there's a way. Attention, being noticed. It's very important for all of us to feel that other people have seen or recognised what we're doing, and indeed what we're not doing, and being able to record that and let us know. Growth, really important part of the essence of our human nature, is to want to grow and get better and progress. There are 3 virtual racing certainties that improve our level of happiness. One is listening to music we like, one is being with people who make us feel good, and the 3rd is learning or growth. So this is really important. The 5th is recognition, feeling appreciated for what we've done or what we've achieved, and the 6th is choice, feeling that I have a sense of control over my destiny, that I can make things happen and decide what to do that will affect the outcome.
Are all of those 6 conditions equally important for people's performance, or does one of them take priority over the others?
All of them are tremendously important. For individuals in different times, there may be a different weighting between them, but you don't want to let any of them lapse. And what's exciting about them is it's not just about the manager or the leader, it's as much us as individuals. There's a legal phrase called jointly and severally responsible. And we slightly borrowed that for these 6 conditions. So we're all jointly and severally responsible for creating these conditions across the bank.
And so intuitively, I guess I get that growth is important, and I understand purpose because we often talk about purpose and an organisational's purpose, but I think it would be good to dive into practically at an individual level, how do I and someone listening take those 6 conditions and sort of add them into my work? Like, what am I going to do differently on a day-to-day basis so I get performance from investing in those areas? So let's take each one in turn and explore it a bit more deeply, starting with the one that I think can come across as the biggest and maybe hardest to know what to do with on a day-to-day basis, which is purpose. So what does that mean for someone at an individual level on an average day at work?
It's a great question, and what matters most of all, like news, is local purpose or personal purpose. I'm going to look at this in 2 ways. The first is thinking who benefits from the work that I am doing. So as a result of getting the language better in the application for a loan, maybe a business founder is able to raise the money sooner and get their business off the ground. And if I hadn't done that, they'd have had to have 2 or 3 goes and it would have been too late for them to start. Or maybe an individual is able to get a savings product that they would never otherwise have got because they've discovered that they're eligible for it. So I can start to see the benefit that someone's getting. And we know that the best days we have are those where we've made progress towards helping somebody else achieve something that wasn't the case without us. Now, it might be a customer, as the examples I've given here, or it could be someone internally, or a collective effort. But that what we've done has created something bigger and better that someone else gains from. So that's one stage and one way we can think about purpose. But the other bit is simply thinking that my work is not irrelevant. Now, that might sound irreverent, but it has a purpose to it as well. And I'll give you an example from a famous psychology professor who asked doctors and hospital janitors or cleaners to organise their work between 3 different categories. Did they see it as a job? Did they see it as a career? Or did they see it as a calling with noble purpose? And what people often suspect is that the doctors were more likely to see their work as a calling and the hospital janitors more likely to see their work as a job.
Yeah.
That would be wrong.
Ooh, tell us more.
What was really interesting is the results for the 2 were exactly the same. And it was a third, a third, a third. So allocated a third to it being a job, a third to it being a career, and a third to it being a calling. And what was so interesting is she also repeated this research with other professions and found pretty much the same results. So what that suggests is the degree to which we see our work as purpose-driven or about making impact and mattering isn't a factor of what the nature of the work is, it's a factor of the nature of who we are and how we choose to think.
I really like that because I think sometimes we make purpose this aspirational and maybe slightly unattainable thing for everybody to have. But just starting with that question of who benefits from my work today just makes it feel much more real and much more something that, you know, I and people listening can ask themselves.
So reminding ourselves of why what we're doing matters and who benefits as a result not only is good for our overall well-being and happiness, but has an enormous impact on our performance.
It makes me think, as you know, purpose is a primer for your performance. If you started your week with that question in mind, what the impact over the week on your performance could be versus somebody who just continues with the day-to-day, slightly more kind of operating on autopilot, I suppose. Exactly
that. And not only at the beginning of the week, but at the beginning of every day or several times a day. And the other thing we can do is not only do it for ourselves, but we can do it for our colleagues. So, Helen, I really thank you for that research you gave me. I didn't put it in my report, but it got me thinking differently in a way I'd never have got there without it. And suddenly you think, that was worthwhile. As opposed to you give me the research, you see my presentation, it's not mentioned in anything. Well, that was a waste of time, wasn't it? So there's lots we can do individually to help each other see purpose as well as to help ourselves.
So let's move on to another one of the conditions that you mentioned, which was challenge. And I'm really intrigued by this, I think, because I'm so attracted to the idea of challenge. But I wanted to get your perspective of what does your research tell us about challenge at work? And then I have another question in my mind about how do we get to the right challenge for different people?
So the great thing about a challenge is you want it to be difficult, just out of sight, but not impossible.
Okay.
And that, of course, isn't necessarily about the challenge itself. It's about how you choose to see it. Now, one of the challenges that we have in organisations with challenge is that you can want to be lowball those challenges in order that we get approved of afterwards. So if I set a really low expectation, Helen, this is going to be so difficult. You've got no idea. The market's horrible. And I convince you as my manager to give me a lowball goal, I'm more likely to have achieved it by the end of the year and get some credit for that. But actually, it'll be psychologically a lot less satisfying and I will perform a lot worse. I'll give you an example of an experiment. So they took 2 groups of households and they encouraged them to improve energy efficiency. This is a group of psychologists who are always doing mean experiments like this. And they got one group to have the goal of 20% energy improvement. And they really worked hard to get the 20% energy improvement, but they only got to about 15%, which in old-fashioned performance management was like, afraid you've missed out, you're going on a plan, not so good. The other group had a 2% goal. They got an average 6%. Congratulations, you trebled your goal, what a great job. But of course, you're much better off with the people who get the 15% improvement than you are with the 6% improvement. So what that tells us is we're better off having stretching goals, some of which we don't achieve, but will perform better, than lowballing those goals, exceeding them, but not stretching ourselves nearly far enough.
And so how important is it to be able to see how far you've stretched, almost to sort of take stock of the successes along the way?
Really important. And this comes under one of the other conditions, which is recognition and being appreciated, or appreciating yourself for what you've achieved. So the key is not to dismiss those achievements because they're really important, but not to harbour on them forever, because otherwise you won't be on to the next achievement, next challenge down the road. So it's really important to find out in yourself, to say, what have I done that I'm really proud of? And what can I learn from that and I can repeat and apply elsewhere? And what are the things I could have done a bit differently? And how might I apply those in future?
So in terms of recognition, let's stay with that condition. So part of this is about my own reflections on what I have done well and what I have achieved. Are we also seeking recognition from other people in order to support our performance as well?
I think we're doing both.
Okay.
In psychological terms, there are two kinds of motivation. There's intrinsic and extrinsic. So intrinsic are things you draw from yourself. I'm pretty proud of myself, I love that experience, or that gave me pleasure. And extrinsic are the ones that come from outside. You know, my boss or my colleague or my partner told me I was wonderful or terrible or whatever it happens to be. The more we can draw intrinsically from our motivations, the happier we're likely to be, the less stressed we're likely to be, the more we're likely to persist and sustain. But it's really hard to do because we're so conditioned to want approval from other people outside. So recognizing there is this balance here, I encourage us as much as possible to look for intrinsic motivations and recognizing what you're proud of and being that's good enough rather than relying on other people's approval. But there will time you want other people's approval, and particularly a manager or the boss of the manager, you may want to be recognized or appreciated for what you've done. And there the most important thing is to be perceive that you've been fairly recognized. You haven't got away with slacking off and not being noticed, but you also haven't achieved something significant and therefore not been appreciated for it. And so if I come on to another condition, one of the things that's really important is attention, being noticed. So if you feel you have not been fairly recognized, then go ask. You know, I felt that I'd done a great job on this and you hadn't really appreciated it, and so hadn't done such a good job and they got lots of credit for it. What's up here? And you may find you've missed a point. You know, the other person actually had a more complex environment to navigate. They had to build tougher coalitions, and therefore that's why they've been recognised for their achievement. Or it may be the person just didn't notice what you've done, and now they do. So there's a very valuable part in being noticed, which obviously we'd love other people to do of their own volition. But if they don't, let's tell them.
I think there's a really interesting relationship between recognition, so what I can do for myself and what I might want from other people, like you mentioned manager in particular, and then also attention, like kind of asking for the feedback that's going to help me with my performance. If we were to look at that from two different angles, so how can managers support maybe with feedback and then also recognition, and then me as an individual, what could I do myself? If we were to sort of break that into a couple of actions, what do you think managers can do in those areas to help people with their performance?
Well, the most important thing managers can do, and we can also ask for it ourselves, is to use what's called descriptive praise.
Okay.
So you actually notice what someone did, rather than telling them they're brilliant or terrible or genius or lazy or whatever it happens to be, which is pretty useless whether it's positive or negative. You have no idea what effect it's going to have. But if you describe what happens, then someone is much more likely to know what to do as a result of it.
Okay.
So they did this very interesting experiment with kids. And they asked kids to draw a picture with their hand, invisible picture in their hand, of a tractor in a field. Now, obviously, it was because it was invisible and you were just making it up as you went along. You couldn't tell it was good or bad. But to both groups, they said, the first group, they said, this is brilliant. What a fantastic drawing. They're doing really well. And the second group, they described what was happening. Oh, is that the sun? Are you drawing a fence there? Is that the tractor wheel? Is that the hay in the field? So they just described what was happening. Then for the second time, they had to go doing a different exercise, drawing something else, a house on the hill or whatever it happened to be. They said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. You're making a real mess of this. What kind of drawing is that? Oh, no, surely not. Now, the first group, who'd been told how brilliant they were, stopped much sooner and gave up than the second group, who'd had the descriptive praise beforehand and therefore knew what good looked like. So there's something very powerful about describing what someone's doing that helps build resilience, because we know what to do better. So therefore, as a manager, instead of saying, you did a great presentation, you might say, I noticed you had sources in all of your charts. Or I noticed that when the CEO asked you a question, you asked a question back. And then separately, you can say what that means to me. So I notice you put sources on your charts. That tells me you're very rigorous. Well, that suggests to me you've done a lot of research to support this presentation. Or you ask the CEO a question first, suggests to me you're willing to speak truth to power. Or you're willing not to take something at face value because someone in authority tells it to you. Now, on the receiving end of that, I can disagree with the information. I can say there weren't sources on all my charts, or actually it was a statement, not a question. But that's quite unlikely. But then I can debate about the interpretation of it. I know you think I'm very rigorous, but actually it's the first time I've done it. Or, yes, I am very rigorous, and I always try and get information. I sometimes wonder if I should do more interpretation. So that allows the conversation about being noticed to develop and evolve into a much better way than he said, she said.
So interesting. It's also quite a simple swap for people to do, to move from that kind of direct praise, that was great, or even criticism, I suppose, that wasn't very good, into something that's actually useful. People get much more data for their development when you're descriptive about what they're doing. It's much more powerful. So what if I'm the individual and I'm kind of aware of, we talked about 4 conditions so far, and these 2, like attention and recognition, I'm thinking, I don't think I get enough of that and my performance is being affected by it. What is a sort of a simple action that someone can take to up the dial on those two contributors?
They can ask for advice.
Okay.
So by and large, we all like being asked for advice. You want my advice? I must be quite impressed. So you go to someone, you say, can you give me some advice? What did I do in that meeting that you think I could have done differently that would have got us to a better result? And don't say talk less or make your points clearer. You might start with that and go, can you give me a specific example? And keep asking for specific examples. And if you ask for specific examples, you'll get descriptive praise. And with descriptive praise, you've got a chance of knowing what to do with it. Now, you can then decide that person's bound to say that because they always say, why isn't there enough data, or why is there too many pictures in your charts? So you can discount it because of where they're coming from, but you won't want to discount it all. And therefore, the more examples people give, the more you'll understand what they're noticing and what that tells you about them. It also helps them become a bit crisper on their views about you. So rather than just saying, I think you're brilliant or lazy or whatever it happens to be, it's actually, I've got to give you examples. And that may alter how I've interpreted your behaviour, and therefore I might just see you a bit more clearly as a result.
I feel like we're getting to some very powerful actions and powerful questions through the course of this conversation for people to try out. I love that. The kind of ask for advice and then sort of ask for the examples as well. So you get more of that detail, more of that description. So let's talk about the 5th condition, which is all about growth. What does that look like for someone at work when we're talking about growth?
What it looks like is, what can I discover or pick up in the work that I'm doing that will help me become better in the future than I am today? Now, ideally, we want to focus on things that we're already quite good at and want to get better at, or things we're not very good at, but we really want to get good at. And therefore, we're playing to our strengths. And what we can do is start to notice things about when our skills are or aren't at their best. For example, I'm in a contact centre. I'm speaking to dozens of people a day. I can start to learn how to pick up signals about which are the customers who most want to get to an answer quickly, and what are the signals that they actually want empathy and understanding first. And I can try different approaches out, just altering it slightly to see what effect it will have. Rather like a master chef has a set of recipes in their restaurant, but they're constantly adapting and changing to say a little bit more salt or leaving it in the pan a bit longer. Which is it that makes this recipe really sing? In the same way, in our roles, we can find ways to spot the impact of different approaches that we're taking and get better at doing them each time.
So we start for growth. The starting point is strengths, and we think, what is something I'm good at that I want to get better at? Or what is something that I'm actually not that good at the moment where I really want to improve? So once we've got to that insight, then we move in towards the getting better, the stretching the strength. So what should I do if there's a strength that I want to be known for, I want to use more? How do I start to stretch it? What would that look like for me?
I might look at where I'm not having the results that I want to have. And then I try and look at either what other people are doing. So someone who's really good at this, what do they seem to get away with? And maybe I can ask them, you seem to be fantastic at dealing with unhappy customers. Imagine we have such a thing. What do you need to do about that? And how do you respond? What happens when you have a boss who seems to take the credit and pretends that all your work is theirs? How do you handle that? And therefore you can start to ask your colleagues, and the more wide-ranging colleagues you can come to, the more varied and rich that advice will be. You can start to learn from others who are doing this thing well. And then you can have a go at yourself. Experiment these things. Sometimes it will go wrong. Sometimes you'll have what are called intelligent failures, where actually you failed at something that you couldn't have worked out how to do before. But because of that, you've learned how to do it much better in the future. So you're constantly in what's sometimes called a growth mindset. How can I get better? How can I discover new things that will help me? And how can I apply those and keep improving?
And what in the course of asking myself those questions, I start to think, oh, but the things that I want to grow in, the strengths that I want to stretch aren't necessarily what my job needs from me. So there's almost like a bit of a tension between what I want and what my work needs. What do I do then if that might feel like it's getting in the way of my growth?
So there are several things we can do there. First, we can work out, are there bits of my job that will help me get good at the thing that really matters? So I need or want to get really good at writing in ways that are very clear. Don't do a lot of writing in my job, but occasionally I have to write the odd email or I have to write a short report. How can I make those really good and use those as moments that I can really hone my writing skills? And then in due course, I might think, well, actually, let me see if I can find a job. And the advantage of working for a big organization is there are lots of jobs available requiring lots of very different skills. How can I find a role that allows me to do, in this case, more writing?
Feels more realistic to focus on growth moments in a week rather than to expect growth like every minute to be a growth minute. Do you think that just, trying to spot those moments in the week that's where I'm really going to stretch that strength rather than trying to think this is going to happen every minute of every day?
I think it's all about our mindset. So if you have a few moments in a week, it's a lot better than no moments in the week. But actually almost everything we experience is an opportunity to learn something new. We're almost always talking or connecting with other people. Well, people are infinitely complex. You never master the ability to influence or master the ability to hear or to understand or to empathize. You can always get better at that. And these are great signature skills to have, not just at work, but actually at home as well. Your partner or your children or your parents might appreciate you being more empathetic or better at listening or whatever else it might happen to be. So there are skills we can learn in everything that we do. Now, you might find it's a bit exhausting. You don't want to be constantly learning. You want to have a moment of just doing, and that's fine as well. But those opportunities are almost always there. And the more we get good at growing and discovering and learning, the more likely we are to feel fulfilled, the more likely we are to actually be physically healthy and mentally healthy, and the more likely we are to become more capable down the road. So there's lots of gains from growth.
So look for the learning and the growth will come.
Exactly that.
And so I think this, what can I do? I think this links quite nicely into the sixth condition, which is around choice. So if I'm looking to increase my choices, I'm in a large organisation and I want to have more choices about, what I'm working on and where I'm working. What helps me to increase choice in that context?
To focus on the things that I can affect rather than worry about the things that I can't. And these exist whether you work in a large organisation or a small one, but you're still part of an ecosystem where you're dependent on customers and suppliers and other competitors and all sorts of things, that no one has complete control of their situation, with the possible exception of a poet who sits at the top of their attic and has a candle and never meets anybody outside. But pretty much all of us are dependent on conditions that exist externally. And we can choose to worry about the things that we can't affect, or we can choose to focus on the things that we can affect. And in large organisations, there's loads we can do to build alliances, to understand what other people are doing and make sure that our work connects with them in order to work out what others are doing that is successful, that we can replicate, and what others have gone wrong that hasn't worked, that we can avoid. So there's an enormous amount we can do to advance the purpose or the cause or the nature of the work that we're doing. And our job to be at our best and to feel at our best is to focus on the things we can do rather than worry about the things that we can't do.
So it feels like we're trying to sort of hold optimism for our opportunities rather than feeling like a victim of the situation that we find ourselves in.
I'm going to be slightly psychological about this.
Okay.
There's a difference between optimism and what's called locus of control.
Okay.
So the locus of control is focusing out what are the things that I can affect. So I can't determine what questions you ask me in this, but I can choose how I answer them. So out of my control is the questions you ask. In my control is the answers that I give. Now, optimism is about whether I see something as a positive or a negative, or how I interpret positive or negative events. So an optimist will interpret a positive event as universal and permanent. So I have cooked this meal means I'm always a brilliant cook. The pessimist will interpret it the other way around. It's a one-off, I was lucky, I happened to cook a good chicken, but it probably won't happen again. And the reverse is the case. So negative events, an optimist will say, this is temporary and specific. I just happened to get it wrong this time. Whereas a pessimist will go, typical, I can never do this. I'm completely hopeless. Now, with optimism and pessimism, it is not the case that one is better than the other all the time. So optimists live longer, achieve more, and are happier. But they're also wrong more often. So you want to get the right balance to be flexible about when you're an optimist and when you're a pessimist.
So we've talked through the 6 conditions now, and I think in the course of the conversation we've covered lots of different questions people can ask themselves, some really interesting bits of research which are definitely going to stick with me, and also some actions people can take. But if you were going to pull this together into 3 powerful actions that anyone could take away, regardless of sort of what condition they're starting with, what would you suggest for people?
Number 1 is concentrate on what you can do rather than worrying about what you can't affect. And there are always things you can do to improve the situation. So focus on where you can make a difference. Number 2 is alter your time horizon so you're thinking slightly further out. That way you'll get less buffeted by events, you'll probably get less stressed, you're more likely to learn, and you're much more likely to feel a sense of accomplishment. So work out where do you want to be in 6 months' time or 12 months' time rather than 6 minutes, 6 hours, or even 6 days. And the third is build a community that you can draw on and listen to and learn from. And the more diverse that community is, the better. So we tend to go to the same types of people for advice. They tend to be at roughly the same stage in life, possibly the same educational background. If we went to university, they probably did as well, may even have studied the same subject. This creates a kind of a more static view and perspective than we will get if we get to a wide range of people. People who are much younger or much older, people who come from very different academic or professional backgrounds who do different disciplines. And one of the joys of being in a great bank is there are multiple very different people out there. It's up to us to make the effort to get to know them.
So 3 specific actions to help people power up their performance. First, ask what I can do. Second, look further out into the future. And third, create a more diverse community around your work.
Yes.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully that is useful for everyone. It's definitely useful for me. I'm definitely taking some of that advice away from today. Thank you so much for the conversation today, Octavius. Before we let you go, in our next episode, we're going to be talking about the topic of feedback, which obviously we started in today's conversation. But I just wondered, for you and your feedback, what is the most powerful piece of feedback you've had in your career?
I'll give you the worst,
Okay,
and then also the best. So before I started professional work, I was a journalist, and I worked on restaurant reviews and travel articles for
Brilliant.
magazines. It was enormous fun. And I remember submitting this article to an editor, and she said, I think it needs more zhuzh. And I was just like totally crestfallen. I had no idea what that meant or what to do with it or where even to start. So that was really unhelpful feedback. But another time, an editor said to me, he said, I read your articles, and they're broadly very good, but your first paragraph always takes too long to get into the topic. And you seem as indulgent, and it's for your own writing yourself into it. So I would just edit out, cut your first paragraph, and go straight to the second paragraph. And that I've always found very useful feedback.
Sometimes the most powerful feedback you get is the stuff that you can't see for yourself, and asking those people that you trust to give you that insight is very useful for your development.
It was also very descriptive.
Yes,
I can totally get it. I love the first paragraph. I spent ages conjuring the words to make it delicious and clever and so whatever. And it was just totally for me. It wasn't for the reader. And therefore getting that was incredibly helpful.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing that with us today.
My pleasure.